let's get started with just
Okay.
you know, so obviously since Friday, new information. You've really been kind of doing some detailed analysis as far as not just the number of tornadoes and strength, but perhaps how long they're on the ground, path width and path length and things like that. What's kind of a brief synopsis as to what you found out since then?
Yeah, so over the course of the weekend, we've been digging through radar data, looking at photos and videos from people all across Rhode Island and Southeast Massachusetts, piecing all these little pieces together to find out what actually happened. So we can confirm that a tornado did touch down in the town of Situate, Rhode Island, right around 8:40 in the morning. It was on a discontinuous path for about 9.1 miles through the towns of Situate, Johnston, and then lifting in North Providence right before it actually crossed over 146. The tornado then recycled, essentially, the storm recycled the tornado, put down a new tornado right over the Cumberland town line on Mendon Road in North Attleboro. And that tornado was on the ground for a discontinuous path of 7.6 miles through the town of Mansfield, lifting off right before 495. So yeah, these tornadoes, Tony, they were discontinuous, so they were kind of hopping down. These
Yeah.
these tornadoes aren't the ones that we see out in the Midwest with this honking supercell. This was one of those typical New England squall line QLCS type of tornadoes. They're usually very brief. They're typically not on the stronger side like those EF3 and greater tornadoes, but the one specifically in Situate was the strongest tornado since the mid 1980s. And I'm sure you recall the tornado that went through Cranston and Providence back in August, I believe, in 1986,
80,
correct?
yeah, 86.
Yeah.
It took off the roof of the YMCA building in downtown Providence. And that was a question we got in the newsroom a lot was this a continuous path? And no, it does do the hop and skip, the hop and skip. So not it's not a solid line as you had mentioned.
Exactly, and that made it difficult for us as well, because there was a lot of driving around that we had to do. We had to cover a lot of ground because this same storm then went on to produce an EF0 tornado in Stoughton, Massachusetts, and then another EF1 tornado in Weymouth, Massachusetts. And for those folks that aren't quite familiar with the lay of the land out that way in Massachusetts, Weymouth is right on the coast, so it went quite a distance.
And you can only really figure that out from aerial pictures where you see scar, no scar, scar, no scar. So you see the hop and skip.
Exactly. So the use of drones and the use of any type of helicopter videos really helped us to determine that, this was one of those discontinuous paths from this tornado. But nevertheless, it caused significant damage in Situate on Byron Randall Road. And from our office, one of our colleagues who went and surveyed the tornado out in Munson and Brimfield back in 2011 said this is as close as it gets to that tree damage. Very reminiscent of what happened out there back in June of 2011.
I was on Byron Randall as well, and I noticed, dozens and dozens of trees kind of snapped at midpoint or bark taken off, or that house on that road, which had every piece of shingle on the roof just
Yeah.
peeled away. So those are some of the signatures that you're looking for as far as tornado winds versus what we call straight line wind.
Right. Yeah. So when we were out there on Byron Randall Road, and I'm sure as you saw, trees were laying in every different direction. It's very chaotic. And when you have that chaotic nature of how the debris is landing, that really is a telltale sign of tornado damage. Versus if it was straight line wind damage, you would see those trees or the debris all kind of laying neatly in a row. And that would be more sorry, I'll restart that. Um, so when we were out on Byron Randall Road, we saw all the damage, all the trees, they were laying in almost every different direction, very chaotic. That is a telltale sign of tornadic damage. But when you have damage that's all kind of laying in one uniform direction, that is a telltale sign of straight line wind damage. And you saw it yourself. It's
Yeah.
definitely tornadic damage. And that is where we actually saw the widest point of that tornado. We estimated that width to be about 250 yards wide.
That is significant.
That yes, very significant. The rest of the tornadic damage we saw throughout the day, it was very narrow. You saw the tornado scooting across 295.
Which
You
was
could
at that time was narrow.
it's very narrow.
Yeah.
that tornado, as it crossed 295, it went over into, I believe, Bridleway, Carriageway, uh, development there in Johnston before going into the cemetery. And we drove around the cemetery, and the tree damage there was quite extensive as well. But going back to Situate, the reason why it got that EF2 rating was due to the amount of tree damage that we saw there. It wasn't just one small little area. It was
Yeah.
so extensive, and that's why it ultimately got that EF2 rating with estimated winds of 115 miles an hour.
You're right, because as I'm driving down that road, everything's fine, and then I get to the bottom of the hill, and then it opens up, and it's just like just incredible the width and the aerial coverage of everything snapped and torn down, and just massive trees. And I did notice how the ones that were uprooted are all lying in different directions.
Yeah, it was definitely quite the day. So, but back to just like quickly the overall stats, at least for Situate to North Providence. Touchdown was about 8:40 a.m. and then the liftoff time was about 8:57 p.m. Sorry, 8:57 a.m. So those are quickly the stats on that. Once again, 9.1 miles discontinuous length with a max width of 250 yards wide. Um, and then once again, the tornado did touch back down in North Attleboro. That was around 9:07 a.m. and then lifted off around 9:22 a.m. in Mansfield. There was an EF1 tornado with winds of 80 to 90 miles an hour, uh, and about a 80-yard wide path width. So that was the North Attleboro to Mansfield tornado. We surveyed damage on Mendon Road, right on the Cumberland town line where trees were laying in every single direction. Fortunately, trees missed houses by mere feet, so we didn't see too much property damage there. There was one house in North Attleboro that was on Marianne Way, which actually the third floor window, as the tornado was passing it, was able to push the full window frame and all the way into the house. Many trees there were either snapped or uprooted. And then it moved on into Mansfield, where it actually moved a estimated 1,000-pound air conditioning unit off of its footing on the roof of a one-level commercial building. And that was pretty impressive to see there. And you may have seen some drone footage from Mansfield that finally dissipated right around the Otis Street Youth baseball field.
I mean, what was your thought when you heard the story of this car lifted off the highway? This is per a Warwick firefighter. Lifted off about maybe 10 feet and then put back down on the ground. Now, even a small sedan weighs about 4,100 pounds. That's pretty impressive.
Oh, very impressive. My thoughts when I heard that, I hope whoever was in that car was okay. But this also goes to the importance of really knowing what's going on weather-wise. Be weather aware, know when there's going to be severe weather. If there are warnings, heed those warnings. That is very important, very critical. And we heard that actually from people that we were talking with on the ground in Situate. They said they got those emergency alerts. They put
On the
on their
phone,
local.
yeah.
Exactly. They got their alerts to their phone. They put on their local TV news. They were tuning in, watching what was happening. Now, we put out that first severe thunderstorm warning about 8:05 in the morning. We put a tornado possible tag. The environment was just really conducive to producing a brief tornado. And then around 8:35 a.m. is when we put out that tornado warning. And around 8:40 is when we had the first reports of tornadic damage. We saw on the radar there was that debris ball signature.
Yeah, we saw that.
There was a TDS. We could see with the correlation coefficient, there was that dropout. That was showing all that debris, all that stuff being lifted up in the air in the Byron Randall Road area, lofted into the sky. And then we went back out and we updated that warning to say that it was a confirmed tornado by radar. And that gives the public that confidence, like, oh, this is something serious. We need to get to our safe place right now.
And let the viewers at home know that the radar is not just detecting wind and precipitation and water droplets, but when these trees and branches or whatever debris is being lofted, the radar sees that and it shows up as a different signal, and it shows up on the radar as, hey, you know what? This is not a raindrop. This is debris. And when you see the debris, as you mentioned, signature, that gives you more confidence. So I know there's some confusion sometimes with the public, tornado watch, tornado warning. The warning is issued on two criteria, which you mentioned. One is that the radar feels as though there may be some spinning and a tornado forming. What is it when the warning is now an observed tornado? Is that an observed tornado via the public, or just based on that radar debris signature?
It can be both, Tony. You can have a radar confirmed tornado where we have to really quickly interrogate radar data. You have the velocity couplet. You have the low drop in CC, the correlation coefficient. That is also in an area of high reflectivity and a low ZDR value near almost zero. When you have all those four, you can confidently say there is a tornado on the ground, and that is confirmed via radar. You can also have it confirmed via emergency personnel, police, fire, trained weather spotter. We can then go in and update the warning to say that it is confirmed there. So it goes from essentially a radar possible tornado to a radar confirmed tornado on the ground.
So in a severe thunderstorm warning, folks should know that, not only is damaging wind possible, but in some cases, the damaging wind may not be straight line, but in that rare case, you're getting some rotation.
Absolutely. And that's what we try to use in our when we issue severe thunderstorm warnings, we have the ability to put out a tag that says tornado possible. Now I've seen all of the TV meteorologists in southern New England. They all always mention that, like, we have a severe thunderstorm warning, but there is the potential for a tornado. And even when you have that type of information, you want to essentially act as if there could be a tornado coming. Go down to your safe place, get into that lowest, most interior portion of your home, and don't come out until the all clear or the warning expires.
On a scale from people have heard the Fujita scale, 0 to 5. As you know, most of our New England tornadoes are in that 0 to 1 category, but the 2s and 3s are not that common.
No,
And I remember the last two EF2 in 1986, but 2s are pretty rare for these parts, let alone a 3.
absolutely. The last EF2 tornado that we've had in southern New England was actually the Revere EF2 tornado, and that was back in 2014. So it's been almost a decade since we've had a tornado of this magnitude impact southern New England. And specifically for Rhode Island, it's been 37 years since a tornado of that size has gone through Rhode Island. Now, Rhode Island, small area wise, so it's sometimes a little difficult to get these tornadoes. It's not that they don't happen, it's just that we have a very small geographic area. And they can be a little bit challenging to pass throughout the borders, which is a good thing for the state of Rhode Island.
I mean, they can happen any time of year. Case in point was last November. But our season, would you say typically late summer, early autumn?
Yeah, most of our tornadoes that we've seen are generally because of tropical systems, and then those are generally the weaker EF0, EF1s. But we also see a little slight uptick during the early to middle part of the fall. We see warmer sea surface temperatures that helps to give a little bit of push of instability for those thunderstorms to develop, late September through the months of October. Case in point, you look at the EF1 tornado that went through Lincoln back in 2018. Right? It was
You can say,
2018. Is it 2018 or 2019?
oh, the North Providence one, North Providence,
Yeah,
Lincoln.
yeah,
It's I should know because I went out and surveyed. So it's
yeah.
18 or 19, but
But you get the picture. These it's not that these tornadoes don't happen in Rhode Island. These tornadoes have happened in Connecticut, Massachusetts. We're just a very small little area, and sometimes these storms miss our neck of the woods. So people just need to be aware that these type of storms do happen. But the bigger EF2 tornadoes, those are more on a rare basis.
as far as rarity, you think severe weather, late afternoon, early evening, when it's exceptionally hot. But to
Mhm.
get these early morning kind of storms is a little telling as well.
Yeah, so what we had going on that morning, we had a triple point that was out in about central eastern Connecticut. So we had the surface low right in that area. You got a lot of wind, essentially traveling in different directions. We had a lot of low level shear, low level helicity. And for the viewers at home, essentially low level helicity is spin in the atmosphere. And we had a little bullseye over eastern Connecticut through Rhode Island, southeast Mass for a maxima of low level helicity. We had the warm front that had been draped just to the north of us, and then we had the cold front that had been draped just to the south of us. And we had a little bullseye over eastern Connecticut through Rhode Island, southeast Mass for a maxima of low level helicity. We had the warm front that had been draped just to the north of us, and And when you have a front, you know, you got two different winds interacting, that helps get you lift. So you had the wind, you had the lift, and you had that triple point right there. And it was just a classic type of setup for Southern New England to get these brief tornadoes. I don't want the word brief to take away from what damage occurred, but these tornadoes, Tony, were on the ground for sometimes just a few minutes, lifting, dropping down for a few more minutes. Case in point, in Stoughton and Weymouth, the tornadoes there were on the ground for maybe 2 to 3 minutes at a time.
I talked to the folks in Situate, and one resident said it was all of 45 seconds, but within that 45-second time frame, when you're blowing at 100 miles an hour or more,
Yeah,
it doesn't take long to change the landscape of the neighborhood. It's just like that.
exactly. That's why when you get the warnings, you want to take immediate action. You don't know how close that tornado is. If you're the general public, you don't know how close that storm is to your house. So once you get the warning, time is of the essence. You need to get into your safe place immediately. Don't go to the windows. Don't look outside, as I know everybody would like to see something coming and then take shelter. Because most people, they need that visualization before they go take shelter. Once you get the warning, you got to go, because most of those people only had a few minutes to react and get into their safe place.
And I'll end it on this. And of course, we, the broadcast meteorologists in the National Weather Service, we stay in communication off camera. And certainly the night before, you know, you guys are raising the red flag of not only severe weather, but also the low risk or the low possibility of some isolated tornadoes, or at least the potential that had to be watched. So, you know, kudos to your team as well.
Thank you, Tony. It really is. It's a partnership between the Weather Service and the whole weather enterprise community. Because without the broadcast media, whether radio, TV, our warnings need to get disseminated somehow. We issue the warning, and it's up to the rest of the weather enterprise to disseminate that warning further. Because all what we're doing is, hey, there's a tornado on the ground. We send out the warning, activates everybody's phones, no weather radios, but most people then tune in to watch what's going on without the broadcast media relying on their trusted weather source. You know, some people may just have blown it off, but they get on TV, go on TV, see their local meteorologist talking about how dangerous the situation is. They're just really, you know, giving that extra confidence. I need to go and take shelter immediately.
All right, Tori, thank you so much.
You're very welcome, Tony.
And we were supposed to do lunch like 6 months ago. Then we ended up doing this instead.
know.
So,
Anything else that you can think of? I'm trying to think if there was anything else that I needed to mention.
so other stuff that's going to come out at 3 o'clock besides what we heard on Friday, which was it was confirmed, the estimated scale. But I think the fact that the discontinuous path, the amount of
Yeah,
time that it was on the ground, how the width had varied from what looked very narrow when it was crossing Route 295 to now, growing in width. And of course, the strength, as you know, the width and the strength, changes along the path,
right.
and the hop and skip. But
But yeah, the widest part of the EF2 tornado was in Situate. As it started to go into Johnston and then North Providence, it was narrow. It was quite narrow. So the path of destruction there, one side of the street had little to no damage, and then the other side of the street, essentially, you had trees that were uprooted and slicing through a home. It was very narrow, especially when you got through Johnston and to North Providence. But really, that Situate area of Byron Randall Road, that's where we saw the max width of this EF2 tornado, and that was about 250 yards wide.
you think about that. I mean, you're talking 2.5. We've all been
Football
to a
field.
football game, right? 2.5 football fields wide. That's
Hmm.
I mean, that is pretty significant stuff for these parts.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, most of our tornadoes that we see in this part of the country, they're on the ground for a brief, minute to 3 minutes. They're only, a couple, maybe 80, 100 yards wide, and on the ground for maybe a tenth of a mile. And this one that went through Rhode Island was a pretty significant tornado on the ground for 9.1 miles, discontinuous, but still it was hopping and skipping along that almost 9-mile path, causing destruction, uprooting people's lives. I can't imagine what it would be like living on that road in Situate, where I grew up in Burrillville.
Mm.
My street was a canopied street, and I'm trying to explain this to my family on Saturday, Tony, is that could you imagine you live in a certain area because you like living in the woods. You love to be surrounded by trees, but that no longer exists. That's not going to be replaced for another 60 to 100 years of tree growth. And my heart, personally, my heart breaks for that because as a kid that grew up in Barberville in the woods, to see that happen, it breaks my heart.
And what amazed me is, as I toured Situate that day, is that these massive, massive trees, not falling on a car with a person in it, or not falling through a house where somebody was in it, or not falling on a person that was out in the yard. I mean, extremely lucky, and that's all courtesy of early warnings from both media and the National Weather Service.
Absolutely. And we were talking to people as they're out and about, and they say the warning saved their lives. We talked to a couple kids in North Attleboro, could have been about 12 years old. And we said, "Did you get your warning?" Yeah. They pulled out their phone. They were like, "Yep, rang on my phone." And I asked, "What did you do?" To my surprise, if I was a 12-year-old, I would have been like, I would have ran to the window and looked outside. You know what these kids told me? They went right to the basement. They knew what to do, and they did the exact thing that they are supposed to do.
Exactly. I just got a warning here. For some reason, it says that this may be running out of time based on the
Yeah,
version that we're using.
yeah,
Yeah.
it says about 9 minutes left, but,
Okay.
um, I think that's about it. Like,
Okay.
the only other big thing is that we're going to announce that, a 5th tornado will confirm in, Eastern Connecticut. That was part of a different, that wasn't from the same,
Cell or
it wasn't from the same cell, it was from a different cell, but we did have that one that produced 1 tornado, and essentially the cell that produced the tornado in Situate to North Providence then went on to spawn 3 more tornadoes, North Attleboro to Mansfield, the Stoughton tornado, and then the Weymouth tornado.
now, what town in Connecticut was that for the other one for the fifth?
Scotland. Scotland.
Scotland. And that
Yeah,
is that Eastern Connecticut or?
it's in Windham County.
Okay. Okay.
Yep. Yeah,
Alrighty.
I think it's just east of the town of Windham in Connecticut.
Okay.
And, and the big thing here, Tony, is we had no reports of significant injuries. We did hear that the woman that was driving in the car in 295 did have some minor injuries. She was transported to the hospital out of an abundance of caution.
Yeah.
But to see that damage firsthand and to know that nobody was hurt significantly
Yeah.
is such a blessing.
It is. I thought the same thing walking away. Like I'm surprised that nobody was hurt or killed, and fortunately, it all worked out. The trees fell in the right direction and not hitting anybody.
And that's just the amazing part to see how much tree damage there was in Situate, but really none of the trees landed on the houses. To the extent, there a tree here or there, but it could have been so much worse. So
And I'll leave you with this, and all of them a reason why you want to go in the basement. You see a lot, and I saw this when I went to Great Barrington a couple of decades ago for that tornado in Western Mass. Trees will go through the top level of the house, the top floors. They'll crush the bedrooms on the top floors. These trees are not damaging the bottom floors or the basement. So you're on these top floors where trees are breaking through the roofs and coming through the top level. And obviously the basement is the place you want to be.
absolutely. So if we could leave it with this, people really need to always prepare, or I should say, people should always know the actions to take during a tornado warning. You shouldn't be going through the motions when the warning is issued beforehand during any type of severe weather. You know it's going to be an active day. Review that information with your family, with your children. If they hear that there's a severe thunderstorm warning or a tornado warning, they want to go inside. Stay away from windows, exterior walls. Get into the center, lowest part of the home. If there's no basement, maybe an interior closet. Big thing is put as many walls between you and the outside as possible. And I know there's a lot of sports people in this area. It's
I
not
already
a
know.
bad
I already know where you're going with this. The helmet.
put a helmet on, put a bike helmet on, put your hockey helmet on, football helmet, whatever it is, put that on. Just gives you a little extra protection around your head.
As silly as that looks, do that and go in the basement. All right, Tor.
Exactly.
Thank you.
So nice to see you. Chat
You
with you
too.
later. All right.
All right, take care.